The train whistle faded into nothing. Pearl stood on the platform, her aunt's voice still hanging in the air. "You'll drag us down." The words weren't new, but watching the caboose shrink to a black dot against the Arizona sky that was new. She didn't chase it. Her carpet bag sat at her feet, one clasp broken. Everything she owned fit inside. The station master walked past, slowing. "Ma'am, you waiting on someone?" Her lips moved before she decided. "No." He walked away. Pearl sat down on the wooden bench. The platform emptied. The sun shifted. Hours crawled. She touched her own face, jaw, cheek, chin pressing hard enough to feel bone. Still here. Still solid. A shadow fell across her feet. Boots. Worn leather. Someone had stopped. She didn't look up. We'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop us a comment below. And if you've been enjoying these stories without subscribing, we'd be grateful for your support. It helps us keep bringing you more. The boots didn't move. Pearl kept her eyes on the planks beneath her feet. Warped wood, nails rusting at the edges. She counted the grain lines. Anything to avoid looking up and seeing pity. Or worse, the quick dismissal she knew too well. The man shifted his weight. Leather creaked. Still, he said nothing. Most people who stopped wanted something. A coin for the collection plate. A signature on a petition. Or they wanted to stare, to catalog her size against whatever image lived in their heads of what a woman should be. This one just stood there. Pearl's fingers tightened on the handle of her carpet bag. "Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying." A pause, then a voice, low and unhurried. "Not selling anything?" She risked a glance. The boots belonged to a tall man in a buckskin jacket, the leather soft with wear. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face. Behind him, a mule stood patient at the hitching post. Panniers bulging with bundled pelts, he held out a handkerchief, clean, white, folded into a neat square. Pearl stared at it. "I don't need that." "Didn't say you did." He set it on the bench beside her, then lowered himself down. 3 feet of space between them. He stretched his legs out, crossed his ankles, and looked at the empty track. The silence should have been uncomfortable. It wasn't. He didn't fill it with small talk, didn't ask what happened, didn't offer hollow comfort. He just sat there, watching the heat shimmer off the rails. Pearl's throat tightened. She hated that more than the stare. "The station master send you over here?" she asked. "Nope." "Then why'd you stop?" He tilted his head, considering. When he spoke, the words came out plain, like he was reporting the weather. "You got left behind." Not a question. A statement. Pearl's jaw clenched. "That's none of your concern." "Probably not." He didn't move. Didn't look at her. "Happened to me once. Different circumstances. Same feeling." Though Pearl wanted to snap at him. Wanted to tell him to take his handkerchief and his mule and his too calm voice and leave her to rot in peace. But something in the way he said it, "same feeling," stopped the words in her throat. The mule brayed softly. The sun slid lower. "Name's Silas West," he said. "Got a cabin up in the Rim country. 3 days' ride." Pearl turned to look at him fully for the first time. His face was weathered, lined around the eyes, not handsome, not ugly, just worn, like the land around them. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. He met her gaze, held it. "Because I've got a question for you, and I need you to hear me out before you answer." Pearl waited. The heat pressed down, thick and slow. Somewhere behind them, The station master was locking up the ticket window, metal scraping against metal. Silas kept his eyes on the empty tracks. I've got 160 acres up in the Mogollon Rim country, a cabin, a garden that's gone to weeds since my wife passed. Pearl's hands curled into the fabric of her skirt. Here it came. The angle. The catch. What do you want? She asked. A cook? A maid? Someone to scrub your floors until you find something better. He didn't flinch. A person? Someone there when I come back at night? Someone to talk to besides Job? Job, the mule, despite herself. Pearl almost laughed. Almost. The sound caught in her chest before it could escape. You came all the way down from the mountains to find a woman at a train station. No, I came down to sell pelts. He nodded toward the general store. Finding you was extra. Pearl shook her head. The absurdity of it all pressed against her ribs. Here she sat, abandoned, humiliated, with nothing but a carpetbag and the clothes on her back, and a stranger was offering her a cabin in the wilderness, like it was a reasonable thing. You don't know anything about me, she said. I know you're still here. That's not knowing someone. Silas turned his head. For the first time, his eyes met hers fully. Gray, like storm clouds before rain. Creased at the corners from years of squinting into sunlight. No softness in them, but no cruelty either. Your people left, he said. You didn't run after them. You didn't beg. You sat down on this bench and you stayed put. Because I had nowhere else to go. Maybe. He shrugged. Or maybe because you've got more spine than they counted on. Pearl's throat tightened. She looked away. Toward the horizon, where the train had disappeared. The tracks gleamed dull in the fading light, two parallel lines leading to everywhere she wasn't wanted. I'm not... She stopped, swallowed, tried again. Look at me. Really look. I'm not what men want. I've heard it my whole life. Too big. Too much. My aunt made sure I knew it every single day. Silas didn't look away. Didn't scan her body with the calculating gaze she'd grown used to deflecting. He just watched her face. I had a wife, he said. Eleanor. She was small. Pretty. The kind of woman people noticed when she walked into a room. Pearl braced herself. Here came the comparison. The reminder of everything she... Fever took her 3 years back. 3 days from the first cough to the last breath. His voice stayed flat, but something shifted in his jaw. A muscle tightening. After she was gone, people kept telling me to find another wife. Said it wasn't natural. A man alone up there. Said I'd go crazy talking to myself. He paused. The mule shifted at the hitching post, harness jingling. They sent women up, neighbors' daughters, a widow from Payson, all of them pretty, all of them already planning what they'd change about the cabin before they even saw it. Pearl frowned. And I sent them home. He turned back to the tracks. Pretty didn't help Eleanor. Pretty didn't keep her alive. And Pretty didn't make her stay when she promised she would. The words hung in the air, raw and unvarnished. Pearl wanted to argue. Wanted to point out that a dead woman hadn't chosen to leave, that fever wasn't betrayal. But something in the way he said it didn't make her stay, told her the logic didn't matter. Grief had its own rules. I'm not asking for pretty, Silas said. I'm not asking for perfect. I'm asking for someone real. Someone who knows what it's like to be left behind and decided to keep going anyway. Pearl's fingers found the handkerchief on the bench. The cotton was soft, worn from washing, She rubbed it between her thumb and forefinger. "You don't even know my name," she said. "Names come when they're ready. That doesn't make sense." Most things. A long silence stretched between them. The station master walked past, tipping his hat without stopping. The shadows grew longer. The first stars blinked to life above the eastern hill. Pearl thought about the train, about her aunt's face in the window, already turned away, about her cousin's hand on the step rail, blocking her path. "You'll drag us down." She thought about the carpet bag at her feet, the tin locket inside with her mother's photograph, the $3.40 sewn into the hem of her petticoat, not enough for a ticket anywhere, barely enough for a week of meals. She thought about the cabin in the mountains, the weeds, the mule named Job, a stranger who didn't look at her the way everyone else did. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "and it doesn't work out, what then? Then I bring you back to town and you're no worse off than you are right now. You'd do that? Just let me leave. I'm not looking for a prisoner. I'm looking for a partner." The word landed different than she expected. Partner, not wife, not servant, not burden. Pearl lifted the handkerchief, pressed it to her eyes. The tears came, finally hot and silent, soaking into the cotton. She didn't sob, didn't shake, just let them fall, hidden behind that small square of fabric. When she lowered it, Silas was still there, still watching the tracks. "My name is Pearl," she said. He nodded once. "Silas, I know. You told me." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Close enough. "When do we leave?" she asked. Pearl folded the handkerchief carefully, tucked it into her pocket. The weight of it small, clean, given freely, felt heavier than anything in her. "I need to find a place to sleep tonight," she said. Silas stood, brushed the dust from his trousers. "There's a boarding house 2 streets over. Mrs. Harmon runs it. Tell her I sent you. She'll put it on my account." Pearl looked up at him. The light was almost gone now, his face half in shadow. "Why are you doing this?" He didn't answer right away. Just picked up her carpet bag, lifting it easily, like it weighed nothing, and started walking toward the street. "Because I've been sitting on that bench too," he said without turning back. Different bench. Same feeling. And nobody stopped for me. Pearl pushed herself up. Her legs ached from sitting so long. Her head felt light, unmoored, like the ground might shift beneath her at any step. She followed him anyway. The mule didn't like her. Pearl gripped the saddle horn as Job shifted beneath her, his ears flicking back with every jostle. The pack saddle creaked. Her thighs burned from clenching, muscles she'd never used screaming in protest. "Ease up," Silas said from beside her. "You're squeezing him too hard. He thinks you're about to fall." "I am about to fall?" "Then fall. He'll stop." Pearl glared down at him. Silas walked with an easy stride, leading Job by a rope looped loosely in his hand. He'd been walking for hours, and his breathing hadn't changed. Meanwhile, Pearl felt every jolt of the mule's hooves like a punch to her spine. "You could have mentioned," she said through gritted teeth, "that I'd be riding. You could have asked." The trail climbed steadily, switchbacking through scrubland dotted with juniper and yucca. The sun beat down, relentless. Sweat pooled in the hollow of Pearl's back, soaking through her dress. Her bonnet offered little shade, the brim too narrow to block the glare. By midday, her hands had blistered where they gripped the leather, She didn't complain. Complaining would prove her aunt right that she was soft, that she couldn't handle hardship, that she'd drag anyone down who tried to help her. Silas stopped by a cluster of boulders and handed her a canteen. Drink? Small sips? The water was warm, metallic from the tin. Pearl forced herself to take only 3 swallows before handing it back. "You can have more," he said. "I'm fine." He studied her for a moment, then tucked the canteen away without argument. They moved on. The landscape changed as they climbed. The scrubland gave way to piñon pines, their scent sharp and clean. The air cooled. Pearl's dress began to dry, the sweat turning to salt on her skin. By late afternoon, they'd entered a forest of ponderosa. The trees rose tall and straight, their bark broken into puzzle piece patterns of orange and brown. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in golden shafts. The ground was soft with fallen needles. Pearl had never seen anything like it. "First time in the high country?" Silas asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. The beauty of it caught in her throat. The stillness, the size of the trees, the way the light seemed to breathe. "Gets better," he said. They made camp in a clearing beside a dry creek bed. Silas gathered wood, built a fire, set a blackened coffee pot over the flames. His movements were efficient, practiced. Pearl watched from where she sat on a fallen log, her legs too shaky to trust. "What can I do?" she asked. "Sit, rest. You'll be sore tomorrow." "I'm already sore." "Then you'll be worse tomorrow." She couldn't argue with that. The fire crackled. The coffee pot began to steam. Silas pulled 2 tin cups from his pack, poured, and handed her one without asking if she wanted it. The coffee was strong, bitter. Nothing like the weak tea her aunt brewed. Pearl drank it anyway. The warmth spread through her chest, loosening something she hadn't realized was tight. "Your wife," she said. "Eleanor? What was she like?" Silas stared into the fire, the flames reflected in his eyes. Orange and shifting. Quiet? Liked to read? Had a laugh that sounded like water over rocks. He paused. "She hated the mountains at first. Said they made her feel small. Did she get used to them? She learned to see them different. Said after a while, feeling small wasn't so bad. Made the big things easier to carry." Pearl turned the cup in her hands. The tin was hot against her palms, almost burning, but she didn't set it down. "I was 12 when my mother died," she said. The words came out before she could stop them. "Typhoid. My father was already gone, ran off when I was a baby, so they sent me to my aunt." Silas didn't respond. Didn't offer condolences. Just listened. "She had a daughter my age. My cousin, Ruth. Ruth was thin, pretty, everything I wasn't." Pearl's voice stayed flat, matter of fact. She'd told this story to herself so many times it had worn smooth, like a river stone. "My aunt made it clear from the first day. I was there because she had to take me, not because she wanted me. I ate too much. I took up too much space. I was an embarrassment." The fire popped. A log shifted, sending sparks spiraling upward. "Ruth got married last year," Pearl continued. "A banker's son from Tucson. They're moving to California. My aunt's going with them. But there wasn't room for me." "There's never room for me." She stopped. The silence stretched. Above them, the sky had deepened to indigo, the first stars appearing between the branches. Silas poured more coffee, handed her the pot so she could warm her cup. "Your aunt," he said finally. She was measuring wrong. Pearl looked at him. "Measuring what?" "You." She was measuring by the wrong things. Size. Shape. What fits in a train car or a parlor room? He shook his head. Out here, none of that matters. What matters is whether you can work, whether you can last, whether you'll still be standing when the hard times come. Pearl's hands tightened around the cup. You don't know if I can do any of that. No. But I know you didn't beg your aunt to take you back. And I know you're sitting here now instead of crying in some boarding house. He met her eyes across the fire. That's a start, she wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him that sitting on a log drinking coffee didn't prove anything. But the words wouldn't come. The stars multiplied above them. More than Pearl had ever seen a spill of light across the darkness. Thick as salt scattered on black cloth. There's so many, she whispered. Silas looked up. They're always there. Just can't see them when there's smoke in the way. Pearl tilted her head back, letting the vastness fill her vision. Her neck ached. Her legs throbbed. Her hands stung where the blisters had broken. But for the first time in as long as she could remember, she didn't feel small. She felt like a speck. Yes, but a speck in something vast and ancient and indifferent to her aunt's measurements. It wasn't a bad feeling. We should sleep, Silas said. Long day tomorrow. He handed her a wool blanket from his pack, then spread his own bedroll on the opposite side of the fire. The flames had died to embers, casting a dim orange glow. Pearl wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. The wool smelled like wood smoke and pine and something she couldn't name, something clean. She lay down on the soft needles, her body aching in a dozen places. The stars blazed above her. The forest breathed around her. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. High and lonesome, Pearl closed her eyes. When she opened them, the fire had gone cold and Silas was already up, packing the mule by the gray light of early dawn. How far? She asked, her voice rough with sleep. He looked at her. Something flickered across his face. Concern, maybe it's, or another day and a half. But the next stretch is steeper. He paused. There's something you should know before we get there. Pearl sat up, wincing. What? Silas tightened a strap on the pack saddle. His jaw worked like he was chewing on the words. The cabin, he said. Eleanor's things are still in it. I haven't moved anything since she died. The cabin sat in a clearing where the pines gave way to open meadow. Sawyer Creek ran along the lower edge, the water catching afternoon light as it tumbled over smooth stones. Behind the cabin, the land rose into a ridge thick with aspen, their leaves gone gold and rust with autumn. Pearl slid off Job's back, her legs nearly buckling when they hit the ground. Every muscle screamed. She gripped the saddle until the trembling stopped, then forced herself to stand straight. The cabin was smaller than she'd imagined. One room, maybe 15 feet square, built from logs chinked with clay. A stone chimney rose from one end. The mortar cracked in places but solid. The roof was cedar shake, dark with age. A porch ran along the front split logs, worn smooth in the center where feet had passed for years. To the left, a barn leaned slightly, its door hanging crooked on rusted hinges. Beyond that, a garden plot choked with weeds. The remains of fence posts marking its edges. Silas led Job toward the barn. Go on inside. I'll see to him. Pearl climbed the porch steps. The boards creaked under her weight. She paused at the door. Rough-hewn planks, a leather latch, and something in her chest tightened. Eleanor's things are still in it. She pushed the door open. The smell hit her first. Dust, old wood smoke, something faintly sweet, like dried flowers left too long in a vase. The single room was dim. the only light coming from two small windows. Their glass clouded with grime. Pearl stepped inside. Her eyes adjusted slowly. A fireplace dominated the far wall. The hearth blackened from years of use. A cast-iron pot hung from a swing arm, its surface dulled with grease. Beside it, a stack of firewood, the logs gray and cracked from sitting too long. A table stood in the center of the room, pine, hand-planed, sturdy. Two chairs, one with a cushion that had faded from what might have been blue to a watery gray. Against the wall, a dry sink with a pump handle, a row of shelves holding mismatched crockery, a flour barrel in the corner, and everywhere, the signs of a woman who had lived here. A quilt draped over the back of a rocking chair by the window, blue and white. Hand-stitched in a pattern Pearl recognized as double wedding ring. A comb on the mantel. A few strands of dark hair still caught in the teeth. A Bible beside it. The leather cover cracked, the pages swollen from humidity. Pearl moved closer. Opened the Bible to the flyleaf. Eleanor Grace West. Born March 14, 1851. Married to Silas James West. September 2, 1879. No death date. The line below the marriage entry was blank. The floorboards groaned behind her. Pearl turned. Silas stood in the doorway, his frame filling the space, his face unreadable. "I should have warned you better," he said. "About all of it." Pearl closed the Bible carefully, set it back on the mantel. "You told me, you said her things were still here." Telling and seeing are different. She looked around the room again, at the quilt, the comb, the cushion on the chair that had molded to someone else's shape. "Do you want me to move anything?" she asked. Silas was quiet for a long moment. The creek murmured outside. A low, constant sound. A bird called from somewhere in the pines. "No," he said finally. "Not yet. But if you need to, if it bothers you." "It doesn't bother me." She wasn't sure if it was true, but she said it anyway. Silas nodded. "Loft's up there." He pointed to a ladder in the corner, leading to a platform built under the roof peak. "I'll sleep down here by the fire." Pearl climbed the ladder, her arms shaking with exhaustion. The loft was narrow, just wide enough for a straw mattress and a small trunk. A quilt different from the one below. This one, red and cream, lay folded at the foot of the mattress. She sat on the edge. The straw rustled beneath her. The ceiling sloped low, close enough to touch if she raised her hand. Through the gaps between the floorboards, she could see the glow of the fireplace below. Hear Silas moving around, banking the coals, filling a kettle from the pump. Pearl lay down. The mattress smelled of old hay and something else, lavender, maybe, or sage. She stared at the rough-hewn beams above her head. Outside, the darkness thickened. The creek kept talking. An owl called once, twice. She didn't remember falling asleep. When her eyes opened, the light through the small loft window was gray, not yet dawn, but close. Her body ached in ways she hadn't known were possible. Her thighs, her back, her hands, still raw from the blister. She lay still, listening. Below, the cabin was silent. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a faint orange glow. Pearl climbed down the ladder, each rung a small agony. Silas was asleep on his bedroll near the hearth, one arm thrown over his eyes, his breathing deep and even. She stood in the center of the room. The dust was thick enough to write in. Cobwebs hung in the corners, swaying slightly from the draft through the chinking. The windows were so grimy the light barely passed through. Pearl found the broom propped behind the door. A corn broom. The bristles worn halfway down, half of them missing. She ran her fingers over what remained. Good enough. She started in the corner farthest from Silas, sweeping slowly, quietly. The dust rose in clouds, settling on her dress, making her nose itch. She didn't stop. By the time the light shifted from gray to pale gold, she had cleared the floor. Her arms burned. Her lungs felt coated. But the planks were visible now, pine, darkened with age. Worn smooth in the paths between table and hearth, door and dry sink. She found a bucket under the sink, a cake of lye soap on the shelf, cracked and old but still usable. She pumped water until the bucket was half full, then knelt on the floor and began to scrub. The soap stung her blistered hands. She kept scrubbing. The water turned gray, then black. She dumped it outside, refilled the bucket, started again. She was on her third bucket when she heard him move. Pearl didn't look up. The brush scraped against the wood, working at a stain near the hearth grease, probably from years of cooking. "You don't have to do that." His voice was quiet, not angry, not commanding, just stating a fact. Pearl scrubbed harder. "I know." "Then why are you—" She sat back on her heels. Her hands were raw, the broken blisters weeping. Her dress was soaked from the knees down, the fabric heavy and cold against her skin. Sweat ran down her temples despite the morning chill. "Because I want to," she said. "Because it's mine to do now." The words surprised her. She hadn't planned them. But as they left her mouth, something shifted in her chest, a loosening, like a knot finally worked free. Silas didn't argue, didn't tell her to stop. He just watched her for a moment, his face caught between shadow and light, and then he reached for his boots. "I'll start breakfast," he said. Pearl turned back to the floor. She heard him moving behind her, kindling snapping, the flare of a match, the creak of the flour barrel lid. The smell of wood smoke filled the cabin, mixing with the sharp scent of lye. 2 hours later, she'd finished the floor. The planks gleamed damp in the morning light, cleaner than they'd been in years. Pearl's hands were shaking as she emptied the last bucket outside. When she came back in, Silas was lifting a skillet off the fire. He scraped something onto a plate, biscuits, she realized. He set the plate on the table. "Sit," he said. Pearl looked at the biscuits. They were golden on top, but when she picked one up, the bottom was black, scorched from sitting too long in the pan. "I got distracted," Silas said. "Watching you work?" She bit into the biscuit. The burned part was bitter, the inside still doughy, the flour not quite cooked through. She ate the whole thing. Silas watched her. Something flickered in his eyes. Not amusement. Exactly. But close. "Can you cook?" he asked. Pearl reached for another biscuit. "Better than this," he almost smiled. The corner of his mouth lifted a fraction, then settled back. "Tomorrow," he said. "We work the garden." "What's left of it?" Pearl nodded. Her hands throbbed. Her body screamed for rest. But somewhere beneath the exhaustion, something else stirred, faint, unfamiliar, almost forgotten. She'd claimed something today. Not the cabin, not the man, just the right to work. The right to make a place for herself. It was more than she'd had in 15 years. That night, she lay in the loft, listening to the fire crackle below. Her muscles had stiffened into iron. The straw mattress felt like heaven. She thought about the quilt on the rocking chair, about the comb on the mantel, about the woman who had touched those things, slept in this loft, walked these floors. Eleanor. Pearl didn't feel jealous. She felt something stranger, something harder to name. Gratitude, maybe. Or kinship. Another woman who had come to this place, made a life, left too soon. Sleep pulled at her. She let it come. But in the space between waking and dreaming, a thought surfaced. Sharp and unbidden. He said Eleanor hated the mountains at first. Said she learned to see them different. But he never said she stopped wanting to leave. The garden fought back. Pearl drove the hoe into the ground, breaking through a mat of dried weeds and bindweed. The roots clung to the soil like fists. She yanked, twisted, pulled until they tore loose in her hands. 3 weeks of this. Her palms had blistered, healed, calloused over. The skin was thick now, rough against the ash handle of the hoe. Silas worked beside her, turning the soil with a spade. He'd shown her the rows that first morning, what had been squash here, beans there, corn along the western edge where it would catch the afternoon sun. 3 years of neglect had buried all of it under a tangle of thistle and wild grass. They didn't talk much while they worked. The rhythm took over: dig, pull, toss, dig, pull, toss. The pile of weeds grew at the edge of the plot, brown and wilted in the autumn air. Pearl's back ached, her shoulders burned. She kept going. That's enough for today. She looked up. Silas had stopped, leaning on his spade, watching her. Sweat darkened the collar of his shirt. His hat sat pushed back on his head, exposing the pale strip of forehead that never saw sun. I can keep going, Pearl said. I know you can, but you won't be able to move tomorrow if you do. She straightened, wincing as her spine popped. He was right. The muscles in her arms were trembling, a fine vibration she couldn't control. Silas took the hoe from her hands. Their fingers brushed his calloused wrist dry, hers raw despite the hardening. He looked down at her palms. You're bleeding again. Pearl glanced at her hands. The skin had split along the base of her thumb where the hoe rubbed. A thin line of red welled up, mixing with the dirt. It's nothing. Silas didn't argue. He set the tools against the fence and walked to the pump, returning with a wet cloth. He took her hand matter-of-fact, impersonal, and wiped the wound clean. Then he pulled a strip of cotton from his pocket, already cut to size, and wrapped it around her palm. You keep bandages in your pocket, Pearl said. Started to, yeah. After the first week, he tied off the cloth and released her hand. The touch had lasted maybe 30 seconds. Pearl felt it for longer. They walked back to the cabin. The afternoon light slanted through the pines, casting long shadows across the clearing. Sawyer Creek murmured its endless song below the ridge. Somewhere, a woodpecker hammered at a dead tree, the sound carrying sharp and rhythmic through the stillness. Pearl pumped water into the basin and washed her face, her neck, her forearms. The water was cold, drawn up from deep in the mountain. It shocked her skin, made her gasp. There's coffee, Silas said from inside. And some of that bread you made yesterday. Pearl dried her hands on her apron, a spare she'd found in the trunk, faded but serviceable, and went inside. The cabin was different now. Cleaner. The windows sparkled where she'd scrubbed them with vinegar. The floor gleamed with beeswax she'd rendered from a comb Silas brought back from a wild hive. The cobwebs were gone. The dust was gone. Only Eleanor's things remained where they'd always been. The quilt, the comb, The Bible on the mantel? Pearl had asked once if he wanted her to put them away. He'd said no. She hadn't asked again. They ate at the table bread. Butter churned from the cow's morning milk, a pot of beans that had simmered all day. The food was plain, but Pearl was hungry enough to find it delicious. "Why did you stay up here so long?" she asked. Silas tore a piece of bread, soaked it in the bean liquid. Didn't see much point in going anywhere else, even after she died. He chewed, swallowed. The fire crackled in the hearth, the only sound for a long moment, especially after, he said. Everything I knew was here. The work, the land, the silence. He shrugged. People in town kept telling me I needed to move on. Find another wife, start over, like 3 years was enough to forget. Is it? No? He set down his bread. But it's enough to stop expecting her to walk through the door. Pearl understood that. The expecting. For years after her mother died, she'd wake up thinking she heard her voice. It took a long time for the silence to stop surprising her. "My mother died when I was 10, she said. Silas looked at her, waiting, not pushing. Typhoid. It went through our street like wildfire. 4 houses lost someone. We lost her." Pearl's fingers found the edge of her bread, crumbling it into small pieces. "My father had already left by then. Some woman in Sacramento. I heard later, so they sent me to my aunt, the one from the train." Yeah, the fire popped. A log shifted, sending up a spray of spark. She had a daughter the same age as me, Ruth, and Ruth was everything I wasn't. Thin, pretty, charming. The kind of girl people noticed when she walked into a room. Pearl smiled, but there was no warmth in it. My aunt made sure I knew the difference. Every day, every meal, every time I reached for a second helping or took up too much space on the sofa. Silas's jaw tightened. He said nothing. She told me no man would ever want me. Said I was too big, too much. Said I'd be lucky if someone took me as a servant, because that was all I was fit for. Pearl's voice stayed flat, reciting facts she'd heard so many times they'd worn smooth. Ruth got married last year. A banker's son. They're moving to California. There wasn't room for me. There's never been room for you, Silas said quietly. Not with them. Pearl looked up. His face was half in shadow, the firelight catching the lines around his eyes, the stubble on his jaw. No, she said. There hasn't. The silence stretched. Outside, the creek kept talking. The wind shifted through the pines, a low sigh that rose and fell like breathing. She was wrong, Silas said. Who, your aunt? About all of it. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. I've known men who spent their whole lives looking for something they couldn't name, looking for pretty, looking for easy, looking for someone who'd fit in a parlor and never cause a fuss. He shook his head. Half of them ended up alone. The other half ended up wishing they were. Pearl's hands tightened around her cup. You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it to be kind. I'm saying it because it's true. He met her eyes across the table. I'm here. Aren't I? I watched you scrub this floor until your hands bled. I've seen you haul water, chop wood, work the garden from dawn to dark. That's not nothing. Pearl, that's everything. Her name in his mouth. She'd heard him say it before a handful of times over the past 3 weeks, but this time, it landed different, heavier. Silas pushed back from the table and walked to the door. He pulled it open. The evening air rushed in, cool and clean, carrying the scent of pine and smoke. "Come outside," he said. "There's something you should see." Pearl followed him onto the porch. The sky had deepened to purple, the first stars appearing above the eastern ridge. The creek caught the fading light, silver threads winding through the darkness below. And then she saw them. Fireflies. Dozens of them, rising from the meadow grass, blinking in slow patterns of gold and green. They drifted up like sparks from an invisible fire, filling the clearing with their cold, silent light. Pearl stopped breathing. She'd seen fireflies before. In Ohio, before her mother died, but never like this. Never so many. Never so bright. Never rising from a mountain meadow at the edge of the world. "They come every year," Silas said. "Right around this time? Eleanor used to sit out here and watch them until it got too cold to stay." Pearl sank onto the porch step. The wood was cool through her skirt. She wrapped her arms around her knees and watched the lights rise and fall. A dance with no music. Silas sat beside her. Not close, but not far. "Thank you," she said. "For what? For showing me." She paused. "For everything." He didn't answer, but after a moment, his hand moved slowly, deliberately, and rested on top of hers. Just for a second. A brief pressure. Then it was gone. Pearl's chest ached, not from sadness, from something else, something she hadn't felt in so long she'd forgotten its name. They sat in silence, watching the fireflies, until the cold drove them inside. That night, Pearl lay in the loft, listening to the embers settle below. Her hand still felt the ghost of his touch. Her ears still held his words. "I'm here, aren't I?" She closed her eyes. Sleep came slowly, gently, like the fireflies rising from the grass. In the morning, she woke to a sound she didn't recognize, a rhythmic thumping from outside. She climbed down the ladder, crossed the cabin, and opened the door. Silas stood at the edge of the porch, staring up at the sky. His face was pale. The thumping came again and again, a heavy, irregular beat. "What is it?" Pearl asked. Silas pointed toward the ridge. Dark clouds were massing there, boiling up from behind the mountains, moving fast, too fast. Lightning flickered inside them, silent at this distance. "Storm coming," he said. "A bad one." He turned to her, and something in his eyes made her stomach drop. "The barn roof. I've been meaning to fix it for 2 years. If that wind hits before we're ready." Another flash. This time, she heard the thunder, a low rumble that rolled down the canyon like a warning. Silas grabbed his coat. "We've got maybe an hour," he said. Maybe less. The wind hit before they finished. Pearl held the ladder while Silas climbed. A bundle of cedar shakes tucked under one arm. A hammer shoved through his belt. The first gust came from nowhere, a wall of air that slammed into the barn like a fist, rattling the whole structure. The ladder swayed. Pearl threw her weight against it, her boots sliding in the dirt. "Hold steady," Silas shouted from above. She gripped the rails until her knuckles went white. The wood bit into her palm. The wind screamed around the corner of the barn, carrying dust and pine needles and the sharp smell of rain coming fast. Another gust. Stronger. The ladder lurched sideways. Pearl felt her feet lift, her body swinging out, gravity pulling her wrong. She slammed back down, teeth clacking together, tasted copper, bit her tongue. "Get inside," Silas yelled. "Not without you." He was already climbing down, the shakes abandoned on the roof. The clouds had swallowed the ridge now, black and churning, lightning threading through them like veins. The thunder was constant, not individual claps, but a continuous rumble that vibrated in Pearl's chest. Silas hit the ground, grabbed her arm. The first fat drops of rain struck Pearl's face, cold, hard, each one a slap. They ran for the barn door. The cow was bellowing inside, a low, panicked sound. The chickens had already fled their coop, scattering in the yard, too stupid to find cover. Silas yanked the door open. Pearl ducked inside. The air smelled of hay and manure and fear, the cow's wild eyes rolling white as she strained against her rope. "Get her loose," Silas shouted. "I need to check the roof screamed. Pearl looked up. The cedar shakes were peeling back, curling like paper in a fire. Rain poured through the gap, a curtain of water that soaked her in seconds. Silas? He was climbing the interior ladder to the loft, moving toward the breach. A beam ran along the roof edge, one of the supports he'd been meaning to reinforce. It was bowing inward, the nails groaning as the wind tore at the shake. Pearl freed the cow. The animal bolted for the door, nearly knocking her down. She stumbled, caught herself on a post, looked up in time to see the beam. It swung down like a pendulum. Silas threw his arm up. Too late. The beam caught him across the shoulder and chest, the momentum carrying him backward off the ladder. He hit the ground hard. A sound like a sack of grain dropped from a wagon. "Silas!" Pearl ran. Her boots slipped in the mud already forming from the rain pouring through the roof. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands finding the beam, pulling, pushing. It didn't move. "Can you breathe?" His face was gray. His eyes were open but unfocused. Rain poured through the gap in the roof, soaking them both. "Can you breathe?" Pearl shouted. He nodded. A small movement. Enough. Pearl looked at the beam. It was thick 8 inches, maybe 10, and heavy with age and rain. She couldn't lift it alone, but she could. She grabbed a broken board from the wall, jammed it under the beam, and pushed down with all her weight. The wood creaked, moved an inch, 2 inches. "Push with your legs," she gasped. "Help me!" Silas's boots scraped against the dirt. His legs shoved weakly, adding just enough force. The beam shifted. Pearl pushed harder, felt something tear in her shoulder, kept pushing. The beam rolled sideways and Silas dragged himself out from under, his good arm clawing at the ground. The beam crashed back to the floor where his chest had been. Pearl grabbed him under the arms and pulled. Her feet slipped in the mud. Her back screamed. She fell, went down on one knee, got up, pulled again. They made it to the door. The world outside had turned to water. Rain fell in sheets so thick she couldn't see the cabin. Lightning flashed, turning everything white. Thunder exploded overhead, loud enough to feel in her bones. "Can you walk?" Silas tried to stand. His legs buckled. Pearl caught him, staggering under his weight, and looped his arm over her shoulder. "Walk with me. Use your legs." They stumbled into the storm. The ground had become a river of mud. Pearl's boots sank to the ankles. She pulled free, took another step, sank again. Silas was heavy against her side, his breathing ragged, his shirt soaked with rain and something dark blood. She could smell it now, mixed with the rain and the mud and the sharp tang of lightning-scorched air. Pearl fell. Her knee hit a rock hidden beneath the mud. Pain shot up her thigh. She went down, taking Silas with her. Both of them sprawling in the muck. Rain hammered her back. Mud filled her mouth, her nose, her eyes. She spat, coughed, gagged on the taste of it, dirt and rotting leaves and the iron tang of the mountain. "Get up!" She couldn't get up now. Pearl pushed herself to her hands and knees. Her dress was a sodden weight, the fabric clinging to her body, dragging her down. She looked like a drowned thing, a creature pulled from a swamp. Mud streaked her face, her hair, her arms. She could feel it in her ears, between her fingers, under her nails. Silas lay on his back, eyes closed, chest rising and falling in shallow jerks. His face was white. His lips were turning blue. Pearl grabbed his arm and pulled. She didn't know how long it took to cross the last 30 feet. Time had stopped. There was only the rain and the mud and the weight of his body and the burning in her muscles and the single thought that kept her moving. He cannot die. He cannot die out here in the mud. The porch steps. She dragged him up one at a time. His boots caught on the edges. She pulled harder. The cabin door slammed open when she threw her shoulder against it. She dragged Silas inside, leaving a trail of mud and water across the floor she'd scrubbed so carefully. The fire had died to embers. The cabin was cold, shadows filling the corner. Pearl let Silas down as gently as she could. His head lolled sideways. His skin was like ice when she touched his face. Hypothermia. The cold and the wet and the shock. She'd seen it once. Years ago, a neighbor's child who'd fallen through pond ice. The boy had survived, but only because they'd warmed him in time. Pearl built up the fire. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the kindling. The matches were damp. The first 3 failing before one finally caught. She fed the flame, blew on it, added larger pieces, then logs, until the hearth roared with heat. Silas hadn't moved. Pearl went to him. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, the fabric sticky with blood. She peeled it back. The wound was ugly, a gash 4 inches long, deep enough to see muscle, but the bleeding had slowed. The cold was more dangerous. She stripped off his wet shirt. His chest was bare, pale, rising and falling too fast. She grabbed the quilt from the rocking chair, Eleanor's quilt, and wrapped it around him, tucking the edges under his body. Not enough. Pearl found every blanket in the cabin, piled them on top of him, dragged him closer to the fire until the heat was almost unbearable. Still, his lips stayed blue. She remembered something else about the neighbor's boy. How they'd warmed him. Skin to skin, the women had said. Body heat is faster than any fire. Pearl hesitated. Her dress was soaked, dripping, cold as the rain outside. She was pulling warmth from him, not giving it. She stripped off the dress. Her petticoat followed. Standing in the firelight in nothing but her shift, her body exposed, her flesh goosebumped with cold and something else, the vulnerability of being seen even by an unconscious man. She lifted the blankets and lay down beside him. His skin was ice against hers. She pressed closer, wrapping her arms around him, letting what heat she had left flow into his chest, his arms, his back. His breathing steadied. Slowly, so slowly she thought she'd imagined it. Pearl held him. The fire crackled. The storm raged outside, wind howling around the cabin, rain drumming on the roof. But inside, inch by inch, warmth returned. His hand moved, found hers. "Don't leave." The words came out cracked, barely a whisper. Pearl's arms tightened around him. "Where would I go, you fool?" "This is home." She felt him shudder. Not from cold this time. The storm lasted through the night. Pearl didn't sleep. She fed the fire, changed the bandage on his shoulder, stayed beside him under the blankets, lending him what heat she could. By dawn, The rain had stopped. Gray light crept through the windows. Silas's face had color again, not healthy, but alive. His lips had returned to their normal shape. Pearl sat up. Every muscle in her body protested. Her dress lay on the floor where she'd dropped it, stiff now with dried mud. Her hands were scraped raw. Her knee throbbed where she'd hit the rock. Silas opened his eyes. He looked at her. At the blankets piled around him. At the fire burning strong in the hearth. "You stayed up all night," he said. "Yes." "You got me inside. In that storm." "Yes." He was quiet for a long moment. The morning light shifted, catching the stubble on his jaw, the deep lines around his eyes. "Why?" Pearl reached for her dress, held it in her lap, her fingers working at the dried mud. "Because you stopped for me," she said. "At that station, when everyone else walked past." Silas closed his eyes. His hand found hers again, squeezed once, and didn't let go. Outside, the birds were singing. The storm had passed. But when Pearl looked through the window at the barn, her chest went tight. The roof had collapsed. Not just the corner they'd been trying to fix. The whole thing. The beams lay in a tangle of shattered wood and twisted metal, the walls bowing outward from the weight. Job was inside that barn. She hadn't seen him come out. Job was alive. Pearl found him in the back corner of the collapsed barn, trapped in a pocket where two fallen beams had crossed above him like a tent. He brayed when he saw her, wild-eyed and trembling, a gash along his flank where a splinter had caught him. But standing, alive. It took them half the morning to clear enough debris to free him. Pearl hauling broken boards while Silas moving slowly, favoring his injured shoulder, directed the work from where he sat on an overturned bucket. The mule limped out into the sunlight, shook himself once, and walked straight to the water trough like nothing had happened. The barn was gone. The cow had fled during the storm and didn't return, despite 3 days of searching. 2 of the chickens were dead, crushed under the fallen wall. The rest had scattered into the forest and would need to be hunted down over the following weeks. But Job was alive, and so was Silas, and so was she. 5 weeks passed. The wound on Silas's shoulder healed slowly, the edges refusing to close at first, weeping fluid that Pearl cleaned twice a day with boiled rags. She made poultices from yarrow and plantain, plants she'd found described in a book on Eleanor's shelf. The first batch was too wet and slid off. The second drew too tight. By the third attempt, she'd learned the right consistency. The swelling went down. The redness faded. New skin began to form. Pink. By the 5th week, Silas could lift his arm above his head without wincing. Not all the way, but enough. "Town run?" he said one morning, standing in the doorway with his hat in his hands. "We're low on flour, coffee, salt, and I need to see about getting lumber for the new barn." Pearl wiped her hands on her apron. The bread she'd been shaping sat in lumps on the table, waiting for the oven. "I'll come with you." He looked at her. Something passed across his face, surprise, maybe, or something warmer. "All right," he said. They rode together on Job, Pearl sitting in front, Silas's arms around her to hold the reins. The mule's limp had faded to nothing. The gash on his flank now just a pale scar under his rough coat. The trail down from the cabin was familiar now, every switchback, every stream crossing, every stand of aspens that had dropped their leaves and stood bare against the gray November sky. Copper Springs looked smaller than Pearl remembered. Dustier. The train station where she'd sat for hours on that wooden bench seemed like something from another life. Another woman's life. Silas tied Job at the general store. Pearl followed him inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim interior after the bright sunlight. The store smelled of coffee and leather and pickled brine, Barrels lined the walls. Bolts of cloth sat stacked on a table near the window. Silas West, the man behind the counter, older, bald, with wire spectacles perched on his nose, nodded a greeting. Been a while. 6 weeks, give or take. Silas handed over a list. We had some trouble. Storm took the barn. Heard about that, right? Bad one. Hit all through the rim country. The shopkeeper glanced at Pearl, curiosity flickering in his eyes. Who's this Pearl? She's staying with me. The man's eyebrows rose, but he said nothing. He turned to gather supplies from the shelf. Pearl wandered toward the window, her fingers trailing over the bolts of cloth, calico, muslin. A dark blue wool that would make a warm dress for the coming cold months. She thought about Eleanor's quilt, still draped over the rocking chair at the cabin, about the comb on the mantel she'd finally put away in a drawer, with Silas's quiet permission. Ma'am. She turned. A younger man had appeared from the back room, a stack of letters in his hand. The postmaster, she realized. The general store must double as the post office. You're the woman from the train station end of September. Pearl's stomach tightened. Yeah, got a letter for you? Came last week. He shuffled through the stack, pulled out an envelope. Pearl. No last name given. But the station master described you when your aunt came asking where you'd gone. Took some doing to track down which direction you'd headed. She took the letter. The paper was cheap. The ink smeared in places. The handwriting was familiar, tight, slanted, cramped at the margins. Her aunt's hand. Pearl stared at it. Pearl. Silas had finished at the counter. He stood with a canvas sack of supplies over his good shoulder, watching her. Letter, she said. The word came out strange, hollow. They walked outside. Silas loaded the supplies onto Job. Pearl stood on the boardwalk, the envelope in her hands, unable to open it. You don't have to read it, Silas said. I know, but she did. She slid her finger under the seal. The letter was 2 pages, written on both sides. Her aunt's voice came through clearly, the clipped sentences, the absence of warmth, the way every line felt like an accusation even when the words were neutral. Pearl, we arrived in California 3 weeks ago. The house is smaller than expected. Ruth is struggling with the new climate. The baby is due in February, and there is much to prepare. The banker's family does not send help. There is only myself to manage the household, and my hands are not what they were. The work is too much. You will come to California? There is a train from Tucson. Ruth's husband will pay for the ticket. You will work in the household until the child is grown. This is what family does. Do not delay. Send word of your arrival date to the address below. Aunt Margaret Pearl read it again. And again. No greeting. No inquiry about where she'd been, how she'd survived, whether she was alive or dead. Just instructions. Demands. The assumption that Pearl would obey because she had always obeyed. What does it say? Silas asked. She handed him the letter. He read slowly, his lips moving slightly over the words. When he finished, he folded the pages and gave them back. What do you want to do? Pearl looked down at the letter in her hands. The cheap paper. The cramped handwriting. The words that demanded everything and offered nothing. You will come to California. She remembered her aunt's face in the train window, already turning away. Her cousin's hand on the rail, blocking her path. The last words she'd heard before the train pulled out. You'll drag us down. You always have. And now this. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement, just a new demand, wrapped in the language of family obligation. This is what family does. Pearl thought about the cabin, about the garden she'd cleared with blistered hands, about the floor she'd scrubbed until her palms bled, about Silas, lying in the mud, and the way she dragged him through the storm because she couldn't let him die. She thought about the fireflies, about the stars, and about the morning light on Sawyer Creek and the sound of the water over stone. "They want my work," she said quietly. "Not me. There's a difference." Silas waited. Pearl walked to the edge of the boardwalk. A horse trough sat there, the water still and dark. She could see her reflection in it, her face thinner than it had been. Her skin browned from weeks of working in the sun. A different woman than the one who'd sat on that bench 2 months ago. She tore the letter in half, then in quarters, then smaller, until the pieces were confetti in her palm. She scattered them into the wind. The paper fragments caught the breeze, swirling away down the dusty street. One piece stuck to the edge of the trough. Pearl watched it soak through, the ink bleeding, the words dissolving into nothing. "Pearl," she turned, and Silas stood beside Job, his hand resting on the mule's neck. His face was unreadable. "You sure?" he asked. "Yes?" "They're your family. They're people I'm related to." She stepped off the boardwalk, crossed to where he stood. "That's not the same thing." Silas didn't argue. He just nodded, once, and offered her his hand to help her mount. They rode back up the mountain in silence. The trail climbed steadily, leaving Copper Springs behind. The pines closed in around them, the air cooling as they gained elevation. "You could have gone," Silas said finally. "If you wanted, I wouldn't have stopped you. I know California's supposed to be nice, warm, ocean, and all that. I've seen enough trains for one lifetime." A pause. Then, so quiet, she almost missed it. "Good." Pearl felt his arms around her, holding the reins, steady and warm. She leaned back, just slightly, and felt him adjust to take her weight. The trail wound upward. The sun slanted through the bare branches. Somewhere above them, a hawk circled on the thermals, riding the wind without effort. "Silas." "Yeah, thank you for not telling me what to do." He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "Spent most of my life having people tell me what I should want, what I should feel, what kind of man I should be." He paused. "I figure everyone deserves to make their own choices, especially the hard ones." Pearl thought about that as they rode, about choice, about the freedom to decide, and the weight of living with the decision. She didn't regret the letter, didn't regret the torn pieces scattered in the wind. But somewhere deep in her chest, there was a hollow space, a small, cold pocket that felt like loss. Not for her aunt, not for Ruth, for the family she'd wished they could have been. The love she'd spent years hoping would appear if she just worked hard enough, was small enough, asked for little enough. That hope was gone now, scattered like the letter she'd torn to pieces. And in its place, not emptiness, but something harder, cleaner, a foundation she could stand on. They reached the cabin as the sun touched the western ridge. The clearing looked different in the golden light. The remains of the barn cleared away now, the rebuilt chicken coop, the garden put to bed for winter under a layer of straw. Home. Pearl slid off Job's back. Her legs were stiff from riding. Her mind was still circling the letter, the words she'd destroyed, the choice she'd made. Silas unloaded the supplies. "Mamio." He moved more easily now, still protective of his shoulder, but stronger than he'd been a month ago. He paused at the cabin door. She looked up. That thing you said, about them wanting your work, not you. He set down the flour sack. It's been going around in my head all the way up the mountain, and he took off his hat, ran his fingers through his hair. Something shifted in his face, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. I've been meaning to ask you something. Since the storm, maybe since before that. He met her eyes. But I need you to know whatever you answer. You stayed. This is your home now. That doesn't change. Pearl's heart beat faster. What's the question? Silas opened his mouth, closed it. Then from somewhere down the trail, the sound of hoofbeats. They both turned. A rider was coming up the path, a young man on a gray horse, moving fast. Mr. West! Silas stepped forward, squinting into the fading light. That's Billy Harper, from town. The rider reined up in front of the cabin, his horse lathered with sweat. Billy Harper was young, maybe 18, his face flushed from hard riding. Mr. West? He gasped. There's a woman in town. Came in on this afternoon's train. She's looking for someone named Pearl. Pearl's blood went cold. Says she's her cousin. Name of Ruth. And Mr. West she's expecting. Looks like she could have that baby any day now. Pearl didn't sleep that night. She lay in the loft, staring at the beams above her head, listening to the silence of the cabin. Below, Silas had banked the fire and gone to his bedroll. But she could tell from his breathing that he wasn't sleeping either. Ruth, here, in Copper Springs, pregnant and alone. The questions circled like vultures. Why had she come? What did she want? The letter had been clear. Pearl was summoned to California, not the other way around. Ruth didn't travel. Ruth didn't lower herself to chase after anyone, least of all her unwanted cousin, unless something had changed. Dawn came gray and cold. Pearl climbed down from the loft, pulled on her dress, and found Silas already at the stove, heating water for coffee. I have to go, she said. He nodded. I'll saddle Job. You don't have to come. I know. They rode down together. The trail they'd taken the day before. The same switchbacks and stream crossings. But the light was different now, flat, overcast, the mountains hidden behind a low ceiling of cloud. Copper Springs was quiet when they arrived. Smoke rose from chimneys. A dog barked somewhere. The train station sat empty. The platform swept clean. The boarding house, Silas said. Mrs. Harmon's, that's where she'd be staying. Pearl climbed down from Job. Her legs felt unsteady. Her hands were cold despite her gloves. I'll wait here, Silas said, however long it takes. She looked at him. His face was calm, unreadable. But his eyes held something she couldn't name. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet. Go see what you want. The boarding house was a 2-story frame building with a wraparound porch. Pearl climbed the steps, knocked on the door. A woman in an apron answered Ms. Harmon, presumably, and led her to a small parlor off the main hall. Ruth was sitting by the window. She looked different. Thinner in the face, though her belly was swollen beneath her traveling dress. Her skin was pale, with dark circles under her eyes. Her hair escaped from its pins. She looked exhausted. Pearl realized, like someone who had run out of places to hide. Ruth stood around her hands twisted together in front of her belly. Ruth. They stood across the room from each other. The distance between them felt like miles. You got Mother's letter, Ruth said as he got. I got it. And I tore it up. Ruth's face flickered surprise. Then something harder. So you won't come? No, Pearl, please. Ruth took a step forward. Her voice cracked. I didn't come all this way to argue. I came because... She stopped, swallowed. Because Mother doesn't know I'm here, Pearl frowned. Ruth sank back into her chair. Her hands rested on her belly, protective. I left 4 days ago. A woman from church agreed to travel with me as far as Tucson. I took money to Chelt from the household account and bought a ticket east. You left California? Why? Ruth's laugh was bitter, cracked. Because I couldn't breathe there. Because William's family treats me like furniture. Because Mother blames me for everything: the small house, the difficult pregnancy, the fact that William's practice isn't thriving. She looked up. Because I remembered how it felt to be blamed for everything. And I realized I'd spent my whole life letting her do it to you instead of me. Pearl's chest tightened. She didn't move. I was a coward, Ruth said. All those years I knew what she was doing to you, the way she spoke to you, treated you. And I never said a word. I just let it happen because it meant she wasn't doing it to me. The words hung in the air. Pearl felt them land, one by one, in places she'd tried to seal off. Why are you telling me this now? Ruth's hand moved to her belly again. Because I'm going to have a daughter. They told me 2 weeks ago. A girl. Her voice broke. And I keep thinking, what if she's like me? What if she's thin and pretty and everyone loves her? That would be easy. But what if she's different? What if she doesn't fit what people expect? Pearl's jaw tightened. Like me, you mean? I mean, what if she's someone the world doesn't see? Someone who has to fight for everything, who never gets chosen, who has to prove herself over and over just to be treated like a person. She looked at Pearl directly. I don't want her to have to do that. And I don't want to be the mother who teaches her that she's not enough. The silence stretched. Outside, a horse whinnied. A door slammed somewhere in the house. So you came here, Pearl said slowly, to tell me you're sorry. I came to ask you to forgive me, and to tell you. Ruth hesitated. I'm not going back to California. Not to William. Not to Mother. I don't know where I'm going. But it's not there. And Pearl studied her cousin's face. The weariness, the fear, the desperate hope. For years, she'd imagined this moment. Ruth, humbled, apologizing, admitting what they both knew but never spoke. Pearl had rehearsed her response 1,000 times, the cutting words, the righteous anger, the satisfaction of watching Ruth finally understand what she'd done. But standing here, in this dim parlor, looking at a pregnant woman who'd fled her own life, Pearl felt none of it. I spent 15 years hating you, Pearl said, hating what you had, what I didn't have, what you let happen. Ruth flinched but didn't look away. And then I came here, to this place, and I met someone who looked at me and saw me. The man in the street, Ruth said quietly, with the mule. His name is Silas. Is he? Are you? I don't know what we are, but I know what I am. For the first time in my life, I know that Pearl walked to the window. The glass was streaked with old rain. Through it, she could see the main street and Silas standing beside Job, his hat pulled low against the morning chill. "I can't give you what you're looking for," Pearl said. "I can't tell you that everything's forgiven and we can start over like nothing happened. Too much has happened. We're not those people anymore." Ruth's shoulders sagged. "But I can tell you this." Pearl turned to Gam. "You're not your mother. And your daughter won't be me. Unless you let her be." She paused. "Don't let her be." Ruth looked up. Tears tracked down her cheeks, silent and slow. "There's a town called Payson," Pearl said. 2 days' ride from here. They have a doctor, a school, decent people. If you need somewhere to start, that's a place. Pearl, I have to go now." She walked to the door, stopped with her hand on the frame. "Ruth, when the baby comes, if you want to write me, not because you need something, but just to tell me how you are, I'll write back." She didn't wait for an answer. Outside, the air was cold against her face. Silas straightened when he saw her coming. "Done?" he asked. "Done." They rode back up the mountain in silence. The clouds thinned as they climbed, and by the time they reached the cabin, the sun had broken through, casting long rays across the meadow. Pearl slid off Job. Her body ached from the ride, from the sleepless night, from the weight of the conversation she'd just had. But beneath the exhaustion, something else stirred, something lighter. She walked to the garden plot. The soil was dark beneath the straw covering, ready for planting when spring came. Ready for whatever she chose to grow. She knelt down, brushed aside the straw, picked up a handful of earth, let it sift through her fingers. Silas came to stand beside her. He didn't speak, just stood there, his shadow falling across the dirt. "I didn't forgive her," Pearl said. "I don't know if I can." "That's all right. I didn't hate her either. I thought I would, all these years. I thought if I ever got the chance." She shook her head. "But when I saw her, I just felt tired." Silas lowered himself to the ground beside her. His knees cracked. His shoulders still moved stiffly, but better than before. "That day at the station," he said. "I said you were the one I wanted." Pearl looked at him. His face was turned toward the ridge, where the sun was painting the bare aspens gold. "I was wrong." Her chest tightened. "Wanting's easy," Silas said. "Wanting doesn't cost anything. You can want something and never do a thing about it." He turned to her. "But I chose you, Pearl. Every morning I woke up and you were still here. I chose you again. When you scrubbed that floor, when you pulled me out of the mud, when you tore up that letter." He reached for her hands, took them in his, dirt and all. "I choose you. Today, tomorrow, for as long as you'll let me." Pearl's throat closed. Her eyes burned. "Even when I burn the biscuits," she managed. The corner of his mouth twitched. "Especially then," she laughed. It came out wet, broken. More sob than laugh. She leaned forward and rested her forehead against his chest. His arms came around her. Solid, warm. They sat like that for a long time. The sun climbed higher. The chickens scratched in the yard. Job brayed from the makeshift paddock near the cabin. Pearl pulled back, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "We should go find a preacher," she said. "Make it proper. Next week, when we ride to Payson for supplies." "You told Ruth it was a good place to start." Figured we could check in, make sure she found her way. Pearl looked at him. At this man who had stopped for her when no one else would. Who had given her a handkerchief and a home and never once asked her to be anything other than what she was. "I love you," she said. The words came out simple, unadorned, true. Silas didn't say it back, not in words. But his hand found hers again, and he held it like he was never going to let go. They walked to the cabin together. The door stood open, letting in the morning light. Inside, the quilt still hung over the rocking chair, Eleanor's quilt, now theirs. The Bible sat on the mantel, Eleanor's name still inscribed, but the pages no longer swollen. The floor gleamed where Pearl had scrubbed it clean. Home, not given, built, earned, chosen. Pearl crossed the threshold. Silas followed. Outside, the mountains held their silence. The creek sang its endless song. And somewhere down the trail, a woman Pearl had once hated was finding her own way forward, carrying a child who would never know what it meant to be unwanted. Life went on. Imperfect. Unfinished. Full of mending still to do. But for the first time in as long as she could remember, Pearl didn't feel like she was waiting for something to begin. She was already home. Some stories settle quietly in the chest. They don't teach us anything we didn't already know. They simply remind us of what we've been carrying alone. Perhaps you know what it feels like to be measured by the wrong things. To wait for someone to see you clearly. To wonder if belonging is something that happens to other people, in other places, in other lives. Many of us do. And perhaps you've also learned, somewhere along the way, that the people who matter most are not always the ones we're born to. Sometimes they're the ones who stop, who stay, who choose us without asking us to become someone else first. It's all right if this story stirred something tender. It's all right if it didn't resolve everything you're holding. Some things take longer than a story can give. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here.